All right, everyone. Welcome to Tiger Talk Thursday, but this Tiger Talk has a twist. For episode 59, we have the amazing Dr. Elisa Hallerman in the house. I will tell you all about her, but most of you know in this series, we've been diving into transitioning to life after sports, and we've uncovered people that are struggling in silence, whether it be due to injury, retirement, or some unforeseen circumstance that forces you to hang up the jersey. Well, I wanted to bring Dr. Elise in to really shed some light on a lot of those struggles that we have heard on the previous podcast and her experience and journey, and just bring in the scientific background and her education. So welcome, Elisa.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm honored and never played a sport. So just really honored to be here in the company of your other guests.
Yeah, I mean, hey, you belong in the lineup because in my eyes, you've done an incredible thing. For those of you that do not know, Dr. Elisa Hallerman is the founder and CEO of the Recovery Management Agency. Her career over the last 30 years has included a practicing attorney, a partner, and head of the talent department at United Talent Agency, as well as the partner in the talent department at William Morris Endeavour. She worked with major comedy talents like Vince Vaughn, Jonah Hill, Jason Bateman, Owen Wilson, and Ben Stiller. Currently, she is a top consultant and crisis manager in the mental health and addiction field. She is an addiction and trauma expert who treats mental health from a functional medicine approach. Dr. Hallerman believes that true wellness comes from healing underlying root causes, and exactly why I reached out to her because I read her book Sobriety, and we will get into it. In addition to being an attorney, Elisa holds a doctorate of depth psychology and somatic studies from Pacifica Graduate Institute with a focus on neuroscience and trauma. She studied at UCLA to become a drug and alcohol counselor, and she studied soul psychology. I didn't even know that was a thing, but I am highly intrigued, with renowned psychotherapist Thomas Moore, and is currently becoming certified as a somatic experiencing practitioner as developed by Peter Levine. Elisa is the member of the Institute for Functional Medicine. She has done over 100 hours of continued education through the National Institute for Clinical Application of Behavioral Medicine. So she knows a thing or two about what she's sharing with us today. She is an accomplished author with her influential book, Sobriety, A Plan to Heal Your Trauma, Overcome Addiction, and Reconnect with Your Soul. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, it's a lot to hear your bio read back to you. Because some days I just feel like, what am I doing? I'm not even doing anything with my life. And then I'm like, oh God, I'm exhausted listening to everything that happens.
The history, your life's work is remarkable to me because of the diversity in your background and your experience. And that's why I think you're probably so perfect with the work you're doing now because of all that experience. But again, guys, and don't mind the sticky notes. Whenever I interview an author, I like to tear their book apart. I do want to buy myself a new one that isn't all scribbled through and underlined
I'll
and
send you
everything.
one. I'll send you one.
Perfect. Can you sign it too?
Of course, of course.
But this was the reason I wanted to reach out to you. Now, and I just would love to dive into it. I mean, your forward, for those of you, I mean, we've seen her background. You can read all about her online.
Oh
But
boy.
the forward by Jamie Lee Curtis, I really thought it was remarkable when she talks about the only real regret is the time wasted spent on trivial pursuits. And she talks about the hole that we all go into. And the one that stuck with me too is she believed that when you're looking in the mirror, you're looking at the problem. And many of us need guides to help clear away the noise and shrapnel of our ancestral imprints and access that beautiful center point that is our essential self inside its room that carries and nurtures us, our soul. And I didn't know that she was in recovery from drugs and alcohol. And she
Mhm.
said that her recovery was not enough. It needed to be deeper work. And that's how
Yeah.
your book starts off. Talk to me about this deeper work.
Yep. So, and Jamie's amazing. And, she's a good friend of mine. And when she heard that I was writing a book, she said, I want to read it. And so I sent her the manuscript before it was like done. And she called me 2 hours later, like just read it in one sitting, called me 2 hours later and said, I want to do whatever you need to get this book out. You know, she was in tears, and she really has. She really has been such a force behind it. But I think that what it does is for those people that are either in recovery, whether they were an addict or had some sort of addiction, or they're in recovery from trauma or something else, that, or they're a relative of someone that's gone through it, there's this missing piece sometimes where you get quote unquote better, or you have all these things that you thought you wanted and needed, and there are these outside things that we accumulate. Anything on the outside of ourselves to make ourselves feel better has an expiration date. And so there, if we're not also doing the inner work, if we're not growing down, as I like to say, into soul, then we're going to feel like something's missing inevitably. And for me, that's what happened. And that's why, and I didn't know that that's what was happening. And part of my dissertation was, could doing soul work help with long-term recovery? And the answer in my research became this resounding yes. But the caveat was that people didn't have the language for soul. And so that's really what I wanted to start to create, because I don't think there's enough language of soul, which is deeper than spirituality. Spirituality feels to me, and what I've learned in my education, spirituality feels like still something outside of myself, my higher power, the metaphysical, something that is future oriented and manifestation and things like that. And soul work is a deeper, personal, intuitive, ancient practice of who we are at our essence. And even though we can't really define it, for me, feels like that felt sense of, okay, I'm home, wherever that is.
Yeah, it's that awareness in your mind, that calmness, right? That communication to yourself. I definitely did a lot of soul work, I feel like, through my recovery from breast cancer when I got into meditation and journaling, but it's remarkable. And I think that's why I was so like your book. I think I completed it in 48 hours between kids and practices, and I forget where we were, but like I could not put it down. It was riveting. I mean, in your intro, something that stuck with me was just, it was the mental fog, like not even aware of how gross it was. You sat on the gentleman's bed, and you
The
just, how you,
gentleman.
yeah,
Just want to be clear. She's calling my drug dealer a gentleman.
well,
Very sweet of you.
Benny's apartment.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just that meant, like, I find when you hear these stories and people go through these experiences, the shame is so high, and it's
Mhm.
so easy from an outsider looking in to be like, how could you even do that, without even understanding that inner child that is actually operating, or the trauma that they've dealt with. Or I've seen some of your other stuff where you talk about the ruptures along the way. And it's just that, it was just when you wrote your intro, it was just that mental fog piece as I was reading it. And what
Mhm.
do you find you're able to connect with that part of you when you need to? Like, you've healed so much, or do you really have to kind of get yourself into that narrative? Like when you look at this, or you go back there, I mean, you're healed from it. So it's probably not as triggering because you've done the work around it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in recovery from drugs and alcohol for, God willing, this summer it'll be 22 years. So these stories, like the Benny story, are stories that I've been telling for
Mm,
21 years. So I'm a little bit more removed from that because I've been talking about my recovery for so long. And part of talking about recovery is talking about, what did happen. In the
yeah.
beginning, yes, that story is filled with shame and filled with so much angst and anxiety and depression. And now, many years later, I'm able to look back and I have such enormous compassion for that girl.
Yeah.
She doesn't, I talk about my disease and naming her Trixie and personifying her in the book.
I just really, I thought about, it's Trixie or short pants? That was Trixie. Yeah.
Yeah, Trixie. And so Trixie, she also has matured over time, and she isn't as dangerous as she was. But the truth is that in telling that story and right from the beginning, I wanted to be equally as vulnerable as I knew people were who were picking up the book. And, you're writing a book about soulbriety. So there were a lot of things in there that I didn't want to share, but I was so compelled to just lay it out there because I'm asking readers to do the same. I'm asking them to connect on a soul level.
Mm,
And that's my intention of hope that they will, and that they'll see something in my story or the stories of these clients that makes them go, yeah, me too. And that has been a lot of what I've gotten back is thank you for your, people can like it, the book, or not like the book, or have what to say about it. But the one consistent thing, even I've read some people not liking the book online for
yeah.
whatever reason, but they always preface it by saying she's amazing for her vulnerability and her story, and we wish her well, but I wish the book would have been written X, Y, and Z,
Yeah.
And that to me is like such a huge compliment. Like, okay, they didn't like the style or whatever it is, but everyone has responded to that. And that's all I wanted to do is through storytelling, have somebody recognize that, because it's only when we really acknowledge that shame, when we talk about it, when we're not living in secrets, when we voice it, that it has less power and we're able to begin to start to heal.
Yeah, I love that. I remember learning about you in your book. I was part of the Hay House Writers community, and you work with Can Literary, right?
Yes.
Kelly.
Yes.
And it was funny. I think I remember her sharing this story with the group, and she's like, I was busy. I wasn't going to take on this book, and she kept pushing you back to go, no, tell the story, tell the story, tell the story. And all I was thinking when she was sharing this, it's like, and you can feel it. Like your stories are raw and real. And I can only imagine what was that like for you? Like when you think about your family or friends, were there some that were like, you can't print this, you
Mhm.
cannot put this out into the world? And how did that, are you still in those relationships? Obviously people aren't disposable, but like, was that just a learning of you by growing down, you had to grow out, and those are some maybe leaf friends or branches. They're not real root friends, but
Yeah, no, that's a great question. First of all, Kelly was not only, my coach and my editor, but she became one of my dearest friends. She was acting very much like a therapist at times. And then a lot of other times I was calling her an English teacher. And I mean, she played so many roles in my life over,
Mm,
2.5 years. And it's such a it's such an intimate relationship, writing a book and having someone, walk through it with you.
mm.
So and I just knew when I heard her speak at a Hay House event, I went right up to her and I was like, listen, I'm about to start writing a book and I need your help. And she was like, oh, my company, and we do this and da 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 da. And I was like, no, 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 like I need you. She was like, well, that's not really what I do. And I was like, no, no, like I already feel it.
Yeah.
And so thank God she said yes. But I decided that I was going to write everything. And then what I did was I gave it to my family, to my parents and my sister. And I said, if there's anything in here that you can't live with, then I will take it out.
Mm.
No questions asked. Um, and I did, there were a few things, and it was fine because I really wanted the book to be my story, my perspective. But it was hard because everyone's perspective and everyone's place in what's happening in a family system is different.
Yeah.
So, it was very, but the whole way through, they were also extremely supportive and still are. And, you know, there were things in there that my parents didn't know. And there was a lot, it was a lot. It was a lot for everyone to go through. And, you know, and that's why, you know, and that's why our love, and, you know, you read the book and you hear about, you know, different things, but at the end of the day, like, we're incredibly close,
Yeah.
and we all are. And it was, you know, it was a growing experience for sure.
Yeah, I can only imagine as a parent, um, were they hurt or were they more angry in the sense, and that's their reaction? But I think about, for
Mhm.
me, if I would think like, oh my goodness, I didn't even know you were, it was
Mhm.
this bad, because
Yeah.
you present yourself in
My
a
dad
certain
had
way.
that response for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
He was so upset.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't angry about anything I wrote. He was more upset that he didn't know these things were
Yeah.
happening. I think any parent would.
Yeah.
And and my mom was interesting. I think she's read the book like 4 or 5 times.
Yay,
And
mom.
each time she reads it, she comes away with something else, and then we talk about it. So I
Hmm.
think she's had like a lot of different reactions to it. Um, and so
Well,
that's
her, that story of her, when you talk about when you were diagnosed with scoliosis and she's crying uncontrollably.
Mhm.
And that's a reaction to whatever she's experiencing in her life at that time, right? From her perspective and her stresses and her own trauma, which is the way I read it. But this line really stuck with me. I'm left to worry about someone else's emotions and shut down my own.
Mhm.
Is that a rupture?
Definitely.
Yeah, so that's what you, and it's like all those little ruptures. Just anyway, when your mom read that story, and since you were just speaking to her, I was curious how you felt, but how's her reaction been? Did she have that same perspective of how that experience went down, or was she like, I didn't even, did she realize she came across that way?
I think, you know, I don't want to get too much into how they feel,
Okay,
right?
sure.
That's
I was
not
just
fair.
curious if that was
But
a shock in the book to
I
her.
think I think the broad answer to this question is really that everyone has their own family of origin and their
Mm,
own way of doing things and their own traumas that they've gone through in their life. And so all of that couples on top of each other in order to how people show up in the world. And so I do think that we've all done an incredible amount of healing in different ways. So whether the book sparked some of that or not, like, who knows? But where we all are now as a family is so far removed from so
for
many of
sure.
the stories, obviously, in the book. And everyone has done so much, you know, and we're older, we're grown up and all that. So I think that, yeah, I'm sure, but not everything was discussed in depth in that way.
For sure, for sure. And I don't mean to ask anything that you feel
No,
uncomfortable.
no, 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 not
That's
at
not
all.
my that's not my
Yeah,
intention.
we just don't
Um
want to go down the road again of like
yeah, of
redoing
course,
rewrite. And
for
then she went
sure.
on and talked about more. Yeah, we don't.
Well, talk to me about as humans how we grow. I'm left to worry about someone else's emotions and shut down my own. What does that do to us as humans? Apart from what I think it means, what does that mean to you when we stuff our emotions?
Well, you know, in that situation, and I talk about as things happen in our life, we put these little post-it notes on our soul and they create a narrative. So that day and a couple of other situations maybe caused me to put this post-it note on that said, you know, no one's helping you, and you got to figure this out for yourself, and you also have to show up and be some sort of caretaker. And those were my post-it notes because of my experiences. Now, no one else put them on me. I put them on myself,
Of
and it was
course.
my offered to take them off and to change the narrative once I did the healing work. But I think that, when we're younger, and that's why I always go back and look at the full story of someone's life and the rest of the family's life and what their family of origins looked like, because that's the only way, and that's the integrative medical approach to my assessments, is that the only way you can really understand someone is to understand their whole life. And if someone were to ask me, where were the ruptures in I wouldn't have been able to say, right? Had I not already done the healing work.
Of course.
So when I'm talking to clients and I'm talking to other people, they're just telling me a story, their narrative, and I'm looking for, oh, tell me more about that. And then how did you feel? And tell me more about this. And I'm the one creating the sort of rupture timeline where they're just telling me their story.
Yeah. And you're figuring out the patterns and what's happening. It's super interesting. Now, as I go through your book, you talked about acknowledging the trauma, and you had just quit being an attorney in New York, and you had no plans to take the California State Bar, and you haven't figured out what you were going to do next. What was that like for you on your journey? And is that a huge, like, acknowledging the trauma? That can be so many different people's experiences. Like when I think about the athletes I work with or whatnot. Talk to me more about how we acknowledge the trauma in our lives.
Again, like at that time, trauma wasn't even in my vernacular. I didn't even know what that word meant. So I didn't acknowledge it then. It was only until I started doing trauma work and really studying trauma that I was able to look back and notice and acknowledge, oh, this was also traumatic and indicative of the narrative that I'd been creating. So here I am living with my boyfriend at the time. My parents are going through a bad divorce. My relationship with them is fractured, and I don't like my job. And my sister gives me this opportunity to come with her to Los Angeles. And because her roommate had just fallen through, and she saw me being unhappy. She saw me, right? So sometimes other people can see it in you, but I didn't know. She was like, you're not happy, you don't like your boyfriend, you don't like your job. Let's move to LA together and start fresh. And so she had the foresight, she had the insight about what was going to be good for me, and I didn't. And she was right. And that really changed the trajectory of my life. But, when I left, I remember thinking, oh, F this and F them, and I'll just go and I can just make it on my own, right? It's this constant, I can just move 3,000 miles away and start over. Like that's ego. That's not a healthy place.
I wrote it down. What did you say here? Where's my note on this? You said, there's a few upsides of being driven by an out of control ego and a wounded inner child. And that was a lot of your accomplishments was the result of, and I mean, sure, people listening, these elite level athletes or anyone out there, you just have to have a beating heart there's many of us that have, I'll say it again, driven by an out of control ego and a wounded inner child. Explain that to us, because I know what I think it means, but just for those listening, it's such an interesting marriage of words.
Yes, that is exactly what was happening. Listen, when you have an unhealthy ego, there's a healthy amount of ego and there's an unhealthy amount of ego. The way I start to describe an unhealthy amount of ego is we all wear these different masks as we go out into the world. So you're a mom, you're a business owner, you're showing up as a patient, you're, all these different ways in which we show up. When we start to believe that we are that mask, like, for your audience, when you start to believe that you are the quarterback and your stats are who you are, and there's nothing else. And this is who you are. You're running on ego when you believe the
Mm-hmm.
mask, because essentially that's not all of you. That's not who you are. That's one mask that you decided to put on and go with. And that's when our ego sort of takes over. And so there was a moment for me when I was working in Hollywood and at the point of having a lot of success. And we did these things called 360 reviews at the company. And so people at the company were chosen at every level. A certain amount of them were chosen to, they were being asked questions by, a consultant. And then it was written about you, what people thought, and then it was presented to you. I don't think it was the best idea, but for me, it was life-changing. It was life-changing for me. So when the day I was supposed to get my review done was a very raw day, something very traumatic had happened. And so the guy said to me, we don't have to do it today. Today's probably not a good day. And I was like, actually, today is a good day. Like, I'm broken open. I'm at my vulnerable. I want to do it today. And he opened the book, and in red, he had the negative comments. And in black, he had, just solid comments. And there was a lot of red. And here I was wearing this mask, as I talk about, of Elisa Hallerman, the talent agent. That's who I was. And I operated and had success from a place of ego, which served me very well in that business for a long time.
And
But
for those of you listening, did you notice she said Lisa Hallerman? She did go back to her original name, Elisa, but that was her identity, was Lisa Hallerman before, which I found was fascinating as well. Go
yeah,
on. So you saw all the red.
I saw the red, and as I started to read it, it was very patterned. It was ego, you're condescending, your tone, you're this, you're that. These things that were all, and it really hit me in, wow, that's not how I feel on the inside anymore in sobriety. But I don't think my outsides are matching my insides. And maybe that's because I'm not so clear on how to do that. And now it's time to focus on the inside, because that's what I want to be projecting. And then needed to come down. And that was a very pivotal point for me of recognizing ego and needing to put the mask down. Again, didn't have language for any of this until I went to grad school to get my doctorate many years later, but knew it intuitively, didn't have language for it. And it was once that I started learning the language, learning the difference between my outer world and my inner world, understanding that, learning about masks, learning about depth psychology, that I was really able to start to add these words back into a clinical practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible. And I know in one of your chapters, the acknowledging the trauma, you were talking about Steven Spielberg, who, inspired by his own film Schindler's List, he founded the USC Shoah Foundation?
Shoah.
Yeah. Pardon?
Yes, Shoah Foundation.
Yeah, and and at that point the answer for you was just go volunteer. Or someone suggested you should volunteer.
Yeah, so that came right after I lost a friend of mine to suicide, and I was suffering from PTSD, but no one used PTSD as a word. It wasn't associated with that. No one knew I was experiencing this level of complex trauma and PTSD. So I was just a mess and having all these other symptoms and couldn't get through the day. So someone suggested I go volunteer. And that ended up being an incredible gift, because while these survivors were telling their story for the first and last time in full, in a room with just a cameraman and me holding the light, I had permission to cry, and which I needed to do to get out my own feelings and emotions, but also really, really start to understand this concept of meaning and purpose in your life. And that's what those survivors taught me.
Yeah, I in your book you said I no longer feel alone with my despair, and that really stuck out to me because in this type of series, you know, we do a lot of storytelling, and it's my mission and vision that we help those suffering in silence over the globe to let them know like you are not alone, that we all suffer in some way, shape, or form, and we are more alike than we think. So that really struck me as something. For an athlete who could be suffering in silence, what advice would you have? What would be a great next step for them? They're in that dark space. What would you tell the listeners? What would you advise they do if they, and maybe they don't have access to help or a
Mhm.
strong unit?
Yes, I think two things. One is everyone when they're in that dark space feels uniquely different
Mm,
because they recognize that no one really understands your personal pain, what that feels like, what it looks like, what it smells like, how it affects your day, all of that, right? And so it feels insurmountable, but it's almost as if, let's say you're climbing a mountain, and on one side of the mountain, and your athletes look at this, they're like, I got this, and you head out and you don't bring food and you don't bring a light, and you have no rope because you're an athlete. You can, of
yeah,
course, climb the mountain. It's not, no problem. I got this,
yeah.
right? It's not like exactly your skill set, but you have a lot of others, so you're no problem. And it's difficult and it's really hard. And maybe you're getting somewhere and maybe you're slipping back down and maybe you're getting somewhere and maybe you're slipping back down. And on the other side of the mountain are a whole group of athletes, celebrities, musicians, car salesmen, these people, all of everyone, right? On the other side of the mountain, given equipment and
Mm,
given lights, and there's food halfway up so you can nourish yourself and get closer to the top. And we're all like, just come over here, like come over here. And there's people coming down that have had success that you get to see, oh, wait a minute, it is possible. And you start to feel less alone. And that to me is the miracle of like recovery and the quote unquote getting help. People are reluctant to get help because they don't want to feel powerless. And to me, it's not about being powerless. And I know that sometimes the language of the 12-step program turns people off because they don't understand the way that it was written. There's a very powerful book called the what is it called? I think it's called The Book That Explains It All. And it's basically about how they wrote the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. But it's very intricate in the words that they picked and why and all of that. And the powerlessness is only about the drink or the drug or the food or whatever it is once you've ingested it, that we've lost that ability to sort of stop when we know the consequences are going to be bad. And that's because of what's going on in our brains. It has nothing to do with our stamina, our determination, our courage. But asking for help and getting help in an area that you don't have experience in the mental health community specifically, it's the only disease, right, that you have to focus on 90% of it on your own. You
yeah.
have to be able to do the work every single day. And like you were saying, even recovering from breast cancer, there's only so much medicine and there's only so much that they can do to fight the actual physical disease. But the emotional and the soul level of the work that you had to do, that's not for
Well,
the faint of heart.
and you
That's not
talk
for,
about your, I think it was your 5 year sobriety in your book. I don't know where it is on what page, but you talked about in 5 years, you were sober, but you lacked joy. And this is where you realize, talk to us about that. What does that mean to you?
so yes, at 5 years, I had all of these external things that I thought were going to make me happy. If I just get there, if I just have this, if I just get that, right? And then all those things start to happen. And you expect that to come with,
All
you
this
know,
happiness.
happiness. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, I don't feel happier. I don't feel that hole, that lacking, that darkness is still there.
Mm,
And that's a really scary place to be because you really believed that this thing was going to be the thing that fixes you.
yeah.
It can be so little. We all do it. If I just lose 5 pounds, if I just go to the gym, if I just do this, if I just win, MVP, if I just get a gold medal, if I just, right? For me, it
Yep.
was like, if I just become partner, if I just run the talent department, if I just have a $20 million movie star, if I just, and then you're like, yep, nope, fleeting expiration dates on all of that. And that's when you have to go inward. For me back then, when people would say, yep, you got to go do the inner work, you got to go in the inner work, I was literally like, what do you mean? Where is the key? Where do I get inside? What is this inner
How do I enter my body?
connections?
Having a
Like,
hot flash. Sorry, I'm in
where
menopause
do
and
I
I'm like
get
totally
in?
have not.
What do you mean? Like I was very much like, what do you mean? I don't understand.
Mm.
So
And so what for somebody who's listening, who's saying that very same thing,
yeah,
what is the inner work? Is there a simple way to describe it? Now, I know there's many methods to your methodology and it takes peeling back the layers and you got to know a lot more information. But is it as simple as journaling and meditation? I know it's probably deeper than that, but spending that time alone with yourself, how would you describe it to someone in layman terms that it doesn't have access to maybe your program?
I think step one is always get curious.
Hmm.
So for me, the curiosity was I want to learn more about this made up inner world that people are talking about that I can't access and don't understand. So I started reading books that seemed to go down that path. Some resonated with me, some didn't. When
Mhm.
something resonated with me, I sort of pulled the thread. If they were talking about another author, they were talking about a workshop or something else, I would go and do that. So I just kept pulling these threads of things that were resonating with me, things that I felt were interesting. And I needed to learn more. And
Mhm.
so those of us that can just get curious with, you're not going to have the answers. You're not meant to. But when I talk about growing down, one of the hallmarks of growing down is being curious. And
Mm.
so the guides, as I like to say in the soul journey, they'll appear if you
Yeah.
get curious. You will notice that person come into your life who you're like, oh, well, what are they doing? That seems so interesting. You'll notice that book in the bookstore or on Amazon. You'll start to notice these things if you change the lens from I'm in it alone and there's nothing else to, you know what, there's a big, beautiful world out there. And it can be as simple as art or a talk or a television show, just something. Just focus on curiosity and what else is out there. I promise you, you will start to find these nuggets of guides that will, and then if you continue that, that you will start to learn more about yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I experienced it firsthand. I finally had to surrender to what was happening. And then I did some introspection. And then I always talk about like staying curious and listening. So I was like, and then I'd follow the nudge and then I would take action on the nudge. And then, that action would create magic. And I kept doing that and it kept leading me down the path to where I am today. So, I mean, that resonates with me wholeheartedly. So curiosity, I love that. uh, Part of your book, you talk about there's that personification, those labeling. You talk about Trixie and short pants. And when I think about, for me, my nickname's Tiger, but we've also labeled Black Panther as when I'm defensive. So my kids and my husband will be like, okay, mom, Black Panther's coming out. Or I'll
I hear
notice
that.
when I get defensive and my husband's like, I can't talk to you right now. And I hate that because on the inside, I feel like I'm wildly optimistic, loving, curious. Like there's a side of me that I sometimes access, and she's the internal matches the external. And then there could be that ego side. And I think a lot of it comes from my background in sports. But talk to us and the listeners about Trixie and short pants, and even something simple that they can do in their lives and apply right away when they're being emotionally hijacked by maybe a different part of them. Explain to them kind of that little exercise, because I think it's brilliant.
So I felt when I got sober, before I even knew the word personification, day one, when I started to hear, oh, but you're going to think like an addict still. And I was like, wait, what? Like, here I am giving up on medicine. You're asking me to give away my drugs and my alcohol. And the one thing that's been making me feel better, albeit killing me at the same time. And now you're telling me that even though I'm giving it up, I'm still going to have this ism thing, this thinking issue. I'm not sure I want that. Like, I want to move forward, but I kept seeing it show up. So I wanted to distinguish that mindset, which felt different to me than sober Elisa, right? There was this other thing that was manipulative and complex and quick to get an ego and all of these things. And so I very quickly was like, that's Trixie. And I think I remember hearing someone speak about their addiction and they would call it the beast. And so that kind of gave me the forethought of like, okay, it can be something else. So I just, it was Trixie. Years later, when I learned about personification, and that is the ability to take the image and make it more 3D. So give Trixie a personality, give Trixie her own backstory, give Trixie, what does she look like? I started to draw her and paint her, and over the years she would change, and as I did, she would grow up. And so that really helped. And so I can identify her now when she pops out much quicker. And then there were other ones that really, at the end of the day, what are they? They're defense mechanisms. They're ways that we protect ourselves out in the world. And so short pants came from me being really insecure and how I would sort of show up and I'd make myself smaller. And, and that, and it's so interesting because I did it the other day. Like you read my thing, but there's sometimes buttons that get pushed that make me feel like I have to get smaller. And that is a defense mechanism. And the minute I realize that I'm wearing short pants, I can shift. And so to me, personification, and it's different than parts work. Richard Schwartz does an amazing job of talking about internal family systems and parts work and all of that. And personification is just another level of that, and kind of probably been around a lot longer just because it's so archetypal and all of that. But yeah, I mean, I think the minute I sort of say to someone, oh, I call my disease Trixie, they're like, yes. And I'm like, what's your part of the name? And then they're like, no, it's Evelyn, or no, this. Right away, people know what that other part is of them. And it's really a defense mechanism that shows up for something else. And so knowing what those are, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, and when I work with some athletes too, I'm like, picture you're on a bus, and and they'll label them. I'm not going to throw out some of the names that some of my athletes have chosen, but let's just say Sam's taking the wheel, and it's like, in this situation, you don't want Sam to take the wheel. So Sam is always on the bus, but you're just going to say, no, thanks, Sam, I'm taking the wheel. We're going to make a better decision here. Because you can feel when you're triggered. That's what I find remarkable about this work, is when you can increase your self-awareness and you can feel it happen, like when you have that outer body experience and you can see when you're being triggered, and you can see where, oh my gosh, I've been choosing this in this scenario all the time. And then you choose a different outcome, and the ripple effect in so many areas of your life. It doesn't just affect that one interaction. It literally, I mean, it's like a pebble in your shoe that you get rid of
Yes.
that pebble and it's remarkable to me. So I love that. When I read Trixie in Short Pants, I ran with that. And I started
Yeah.
looking into personification and all that stuff. I thought it was remarkable. Um, I
Yeah,
mean,
I love that. It comes from the archetypal psychologist James Hellman,
I feel
who
like you should make a book called Trixie in Short Pants, and it's like the child's version of sobriety, but how do they connect to soul on a
that's a
child
good
level?
idea.
Well,
You
there you
know,
go.
Jamie, back to Jamie, Jamie writes children's books. Maybe I'll throw that her way.
Yeah, Trixie in Short Pants. I feel like the title alone, I'd want to read it. It sounds
That's so
interesting.
awesome. I'm gonna
You can say thank you, Janine, when you publish it, okay?
100%. 100%. Maybe we'll add in a tiger.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Tiger, yes. Black. You know what's
We gotta
crazy?
add in, we'll call and get permission, of course, but we'll add in tiger.
Well, when that came to me, I was meditating and I was meditating on a Black Panther, like was coming in and trying to attack this serene space that I was feeling
Mhm.
because as from an athlete standpoint, and a lot of these backgrounds of the interviews that I do with my guests, I mean, we've muscled our way through life. Sports were our superpower. And then breast cancer was like I've been through divorce, bankruptcy, and then breast cancer, but breast cancer was the first time I couldn't muscle my way through. That's when I grew down. That's when I absolutely grew down, and it made all the difference. So that's when I had that meditation, and I had grown down, and I could feel that I was changing. But then I was like, oh my, they say at every level there's another devil. It's like, why is this Black Panther? Am I about to be attacked? Like, is it something that's
Right.
working out in my life right now? And then it dawned on me, it was like my ego didn't want me to shift and evolve into this, that my soul did not want to see the ascension that was happening. It was trying to pull me back to like that spot. And as soon as I acknowledged it and acknowledged Black Panther, it's like that just dissipated and I was allowed to keep growing on my way. It was
That's
really
amazing.
interesting.
I
Uh,
love that story.
yeah, and I labeled it because I read about Trixie in Short Pants. So thank you. That was from you doing that. One thing that before obviously I could tear your book apart and spend 4 or 5 hours questioning you about it because I just think it's remarkable. Again, for anybody listening, it is called Soul Briety, a plan to heal your trauma, overcome addiction, and reconnect with your soul. And I think it really does when Elisa talks about she was 5 years sober, but was still not finding that joy. For any of you that have tried to go down this path, this book is going to help you gain some access into what that means for you. And I think it's just such an amazing book. But what would you say out of everything you've gone through? All these different, you're like a shapeshifter. Like you've had so many,
But
which
I
I
think
think,
it all kind of came together. Everything that I had done came together to be so essential in what I'm doing now.
of course, because it's highly relatable.
Yeah.
You've had, and what are you most proud of in
Mm,
your journey so far?
That's such a great question. I think I'm most proud of my sobriety, because without that, there would be nothing. There would be
Yeah.
none of this. And yes, I accomplished things outside of myself, graduating college and graduating law school in when I was still using, but my greatest accomplishment, um, and the thing I'm most proud of is my sobriety for sure.
Yeah. And you talk about the 5 year mark. You talk about your 22 years. Is that what you said at the beginning? 22 years now? Around
No, 21, 21.
21? Um, what about the listener who's not even on day one? Like, how was that first month for you? What can they expect to feel? I know, again, we're all different, and it's being curious and listening in and leaning into that. But what advice would you have for someone who's curious about how do I get even through day one? How do I get through week one, month one, year
Mhm.
one?
Yeah, I think it's important to say, first of all, when I had my moment, I didn't know that I had an addiction problem. I didn't know that I was an alcoholic. I didn't know that I was a drug addict. I honestly just thought I was very, very broken and that I was destined to just have this life that became very, very small and with no joy. And so when I first made that phone call to my therapist and said, what do I do? Like, where do I go? And I said to him, should I go to one of those meetings or something? Because I knew, like, oh, you know, I did work in Hollywood. It was like, okay, should I go to one of those? Like, is that the answer? And he said, do you have someone to take you? And I said, I know one lady. And then from there, it was, oh, okay, they give you this big book, and you know, a lot of people don't read it. And I read it right away because I was desperate for information about what was wrong with me. And and then, but in the beginning, I thought I just need to clean up my act. I need a minute, you know, let's just try this thing. And I wasn't identifying as an alcoholic or a drug addict. Those are really big words. And often people will say to me, like, that's not, and I'm like, identify as, you know, a clown, an Eskimo, like whatever you want.
Yeah.
It's just be who you are and just keep showing up. And if it resonates with you, stick around and see where that takes you. Again, the curiosity. But at the end of the day, I had no intention of like having this as a life. Somewhere along the line, it's not that you don't, it's like an ex relationship. You start to romanticize about, well, but you know, this was good and that was good, and we went on these vacations and we had fun and we laughed. I remember laughing one time. And so you sort of
One time.
romanticize,
Yeah.
yeah, about what it's like, but your life starts to become so much bigger and so much better that, you know, they have this saying of like, stick around for the miracle. And like, that's essentially the miracle. It's not this like aha moment of, it's just this moment where your life starts to get bigger
Yeah.
and better. And, but you know, I think what's amazing is now they have things like dry January, and people are really going in with, there's nothing, you know, they don't have the disease of addiction, but they know that alcohol or whatever it is affecting them in some way, that they don't feel comfortable anymore. And so just going in with that mentality of like, let's just try a week, let's just try a day. And the other piece of it is, if you can't make it that day, or you can't make it a week, or you can't make it a month, or a year, or 5, or whatever it is, if you're having these moments of slips, what you want to be asking yourself is, there's no shame in any of this. That is highlighting something that still needs to be worked on. All it's saying is, you know, I look at relapses and slips as providing you with information. It's highlighting something for you. It's highlighting like, but this is still the issue. Because if this is the medicine and you're not looking at the core issue, if you're not looking at the underlying issue, and that slip and that moment is just it's just a highlighter going through your life and going, what about this? What about this?
Yeah.
And to look at it, it's not about what happened yesterday, but it's about what you do tomorrow.
Yeah. And I couldn't imagine the pressure being in Hollywood, of all places. Do you think that had you been living anywhere else or doing something different, that maybe your life would have been different? Or even openly leaving Hollywood, like some people might even be like, how do you even walk away from a life like that? Like, I would kill to have a life like that. Or what was going on in your mind in that? And I can only imagine the internal struggle with that as well, because your identity would be wrapped up in that world too, right? Plus the ego.
Yes, I think that, no, I don't think that there's any more addiction in Hollywood than there is in
Anywhere
Kansas.
else.
I
Yeah.
just, I think that it's talked about more because those people are, you know, they're famous, they're well known, and it's easy to talk about. I started doing, I did a series over April and May where I interviewed friends of mine and people I've known for a long time that are in recovery or that were authors speaking about. And and what and the reason I wanted to do it is because it's the storytelling. I wanted other people to hear, yeah, it was hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, this happened and that happened, but I did it anyway. And I don't need this old thing, this old narrative to be successful or to continue on a path that to me feels successful. And so for, mental health and addiction awareness month, I did those. And I hope more people will go to my YouTube channel and watch them because each one of them, they got so deep and so
Mm,
vulnerable in a way that, most of them said, these are things I've never talked about before, but
yeah.
because it's you and I feel comfortable and all of that. And so I think more stories about the good and the progress and how we did it and being open about it, not day one, right? But in
Yeah.
time, you're hearing more and more people come out and say, hey, I've been sober or I've been in recovery for this amount of time. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. I had a gentleman who wrote me, and he's coming on. He's like, he's like, sorry, I haven't been avoiding you. He's like, I'm just been wondering if I want to talk about, he's like, it was just 4 years sober, I think yesterday. And I was like, there is no pressure here when you're ready or the right time. If it's not for another while, that's not what I'm here. But here are the other athletes that came forward to share. And it just, that's to me we're supposed to be living as a community, right? We're global citizens of the world. We're all connected. Even if I can't see you or feel you on the other side, I mean, like energy, I do believe we are connected, and that's why I'm passionate about this, because someone like you who's so raw and real. And I mean, again, guys, for those of you that have not read Soulbriety, I highly recommend it. And like I said, I read it in 48 hours. I couldn't put it down. It was so well written and so emotional, because I feel like it's relatable in the sense like we all have these dark parts of us that we don't want anyone to see. And it is an emotional roller coaster. And then there's shame, and then there's paranoia, and then there's this. And then when we finally do the work, yes, you get sober and still lack joy, but then you really do that inner work and grow down. And I think wrapping this up, it would be great for you to just share, what does it mean to grow down for our listeners? Because that's when you really think about it. You've got solid roots in your tree. So when the
Mhm.
wind comes, you're not as easily, right? You're sober, you're easy to knock over, but
Yeah.
you're deep rooted, you are solid. And it's funny, I want to let you answer the question, but I saw this tree when I was walking, going through my healing, through meditation, through breast cancer, and it was growing through, I have a picture of it, and I talk about it when I do my keynote talks, and it's grown through this rock. Like, it's impossible that this tree would actually grow through the rock. And I remember I sat by that tree, and it makes me emotional when I say it, because I
Mhm.
felt like I was the tree. And I was
Mhm.
like, I'm growing through these rocks. And that's how life felt like for me with the past decade. So I really appreciate that. But talk to us about growing down, because I think a lot of people, our egos want to grow up and we want to be bigger, but we can see a little plant, but we don't see all the roots underneath.
Mhm.
Why is that so important to you, that term?
So James Hillman in one of his books talks about the acorn theory
Mm,
and that there's this acorn and it needs no instructions, it needs no help, it needs no anything. It will bloom into and grow into this fantastical, magical oak tree from just an acorn.
yeah.
And that exists within us. That essence of who we are, our unique way of showing up in this world, and that that intuition, that absolute certainty at times, that soul, to me, that's my soul. And I need to take care of it. I need to nourish it. And I also have to allow for the darkness, because I think that in the growing up, we always want to feel good. We always want to feel better. There's a lot of self-help out there of like, just be happy, just be this, just be that, or a
Yeah.
culture of instant gratification. And while all of that is very important, I think that we've lost the ability to sit in the dark
Mm,
and get afraid and we want it over.
yeah.
But it is in the dark where we have the ability to grow down, to let our roots go through those rocks and solidify our place in the world and to get the nourishment. The nourishment doesn't come from, up here. The nourishment for the trees, right, comes in the soil. And that's that growing down piece of really creating an inner foundation for you. Because to me, growing down was, where does the meaning and the purpose of your life come from?
Yeah.
And the meaning and the purpose of your life does not come from the external accomplishments. The meaning and the purpose comes from the ability to grow down and to start to really understand the why behind what's happening. And, I talk a lot about alchemy and just relating that to the sort of therapeutic process, in that when we're going through this process of doing this inner work, it is the same as the alchemical process, where we have to take all the gunk and all the darkness and heat it up ever so slowly, or however's comfortable for you, and let it break apart. Or sometimes we walk in and we're already in a million pieces. We're already broken and on the floor and scattered and looking at our life like, there's no way. There's no way I can put this back together. And if I do put it back together, it's never going to look the same. And that's scary too. And then starting to solidify and put these pieces back together. And then the wisdom comes from the transformation. We all have a fear of change, but transformation, that's where it's at. That's where we're going to have wisdom, and that's where we're going to learn, and that's where we're going to be able to share with others.
Mhm.
And that's why writing the book became so important to me, was so not from an ego place. I would have never been able to write it from an ego place. I mean, how many people say, oh, I want to write a book. I got a book in me. We all, right? But it's really hard to tap into that and then have the ability to, sit in it and continue to write and continue to write, when all those voices and all those inner critics are like, who cares about this dumb story that you went through? Who cares about this? Who cares about that? No one cares about you. No one's going to write all of that and still go forward, because it's this calling almost of, I didn't get this far and live this long and have these experiences. They're no longer for me. Now they're for you. Like, I'm still going through obviously other soul journeys and other things that are happening, but these 20 years, that I'm going to give that wisdom away best I can through
Yeah.
storytelling.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. I'm such a fan, and I'm grateful that you said yes when I reached out on LinkedIn and was like, can I please interview you? You're like, who the heck is this girl? But I'm so grateful you gave me the opportunity, and you're just so humble and such a wonderful human being from the short time that we've connected the last few Zooms. So I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to contribute to the series. Again, guys, this is episode 58 or 59. I can't even remember. There's been so many. It's episode 59. Yeah. With Dr. Elisa Hallerman. She's the founder and CEO of the Recovery Management Agency. She's the author of Soulbrighty. I can't recommend it again. It doesn't come with sticky notes. That's me tearing it apart. But it is so worth it. I would hop on Amazon now, order it, or give it as a gift. I definitely know there's I sent this actually to one of my friends the minute that I had read it. And it's just such a gift to the world. And I'm so grateful that you took the 2.5 years it takes to cook something so wonderful and so beautiful, and give birth to it so that we could all learn and grow from it too. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. And I really appreciate it. And I thought that your message to me, because a lot of people reach out, in social media, but your message was so powerful and you were so vulnerable that I was like, yeah, I want to talk to her. And I always
Oh,
say that to people, especially like a lot of the kids that I work with that are like looking for jobs or they're reaching out or they're trying to make connections. It's like, really say who you are so it comes through
yeah,
because that makes people want to connect.
for
And
sure.
I was excited to meet you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. And now you can put the tiger in Trixie and Short Pants.
All right, that's our next project.
I love it. Well, thank you so much once again, guys. Episode 59, Tiger Talk Thursday with Dr. Elisa Hallerman. Thank you.
Thank you.